Salutations, listeners. How's it going?
It's going pretty good, Mr. Collins.
Is it going okay?
With you?
Splendid.
I don't know, the market's down today, and so, you gotta sell your stocks in Apple and Disney. Get out while the getting's good, folks.
Smash coffee mugs with baseball bats. Anybody picking up these Mad Money references here?
Buy low, sell high.
Well, hello, listeners. Si Valis Valeo, Vala Magulis, Nanu, as I've said before. Thank you for tuning in. This is Three Men in a Basement. We are the Ultra Crepidarians. My name is Colin McLeod.
Mark Culp here.
Timothy Magic.
And in this podcast, we review movies and deliver to you, the listener, an average schmuck's opinion about the hidden gems in the wide world of cinema. In the show, we try to target movies that may not be like blockbuster smashes, but they're also not so obscure that, if you wanted to get your hands on a copy, you couldn't. We try and aim for that sweet spot of movies that are really good, but also accessible. We try and target movies that hopefully you may not have heard of, maybe you've seen but you forgot about, and we feel like they deserve another watch. We review these movies and then we deliver to you our take on whether or not you should spend the time to hunt them down and go and watch them. So with that being said, this week we reviewed the movie The Messenger, the story of Joan of Arc. And yeah, it was a movie and a half. Mm-hmm. I'm going to hit you with some IMDb notes here.
It was quite literally a movie and a half. Mm-hmm. It was very long.
I think it's the longest one we've watched on the program so far.
Definitely.
Yeah.
2 hours and 28 minutes is the runtime on this bad boy. It's got to be the
longest for sure.
So this movie, The Messenger, the story of Joan of Arc, this thing came out in 1999, and IMDb has it as an adventure biography drama. I think that pegs it.
Yeah.
Yep.
It hits all those notes, yeah.
So, before, I'm going to go into the full IMDb description, but basically, if you're listening, who knows if you're listening out there, but if you are, this movie is sort of like Braveheart, but Joan of Arc instead of William Wallace.
I know, I do hate...
Same vibe.
It's same vibe, and I do hate the negative reviews when there's like, well, this is just Lady Braveheart. And it's like, no.
It's just a different person.
Yeah, it's in that vein.
I say that in the sense that, like, it's a biopic.
Yeah.
Of, like, a historical figure.
Fighting figure.
In, like, not so different of a time frame, and it's like it's a period piece. I think it has more elements than Braveheart does, but anyway, we'll get to that in a minute.
Similar but different.
Yeah. I was just trying to set the scene for us.
Yeah.
This movie was directed by Luc Besson.
Luc Besson, who you might know doing stuff like The Fifth Element or Christ's Metamorphosis, I believe is also one of his titles. Very stylish and very keen with his elements of lighting, staging, and just shooting. Cinematography, yeah.
You can't forget Christ's Metamorphosis. That's
good.
It's a very, very popular flick.
Well, maybe we'll take on it next time.
Fifth Element, though, I mean, that's next level awesome. He also actually wrote this along with Andrew Birkin, who I'm not particularly familiar with, but some of our viewers may know that or listeners. So some of the stars of this amazing film, Milla Jovovich, right out of the gate. She's our star. She plays Joan of Arc.
Oh, you can't forget John Malkovich.
Well, for let me say, Milla Jovovich, you might also know for The Fifth Element. Yes. She plays Lilu in The Fifth Element. She's also in Dazed and Confused.
Oh yeah, just learned that actually recently.
Yeah,
I never picked up on it.
A tiny little cult series called Resident Evil.
Ooh,
it's a little cult series.
Yeah. If I'm
just a few movies in that series. Yeah.
Some people love it. It's not the top of my list, but the first one's maybe the first one's funny.
It got progressively better.
Those are
progressively better. Every Resident Evil movie gets better than the last one. There, I said it.
All the best ones contain, Michelle Rodriguez.
Well,
all the best ones.
Certainly. But okay, so next up we got Being John, spoiler alert, John Malkovich. He's the star of Being John Malkovich, and I think that might be the only movie he's ever been in.
Yeah, no,
the only one.
The title character, the titular character, and the what else is?
I mean, he certainly wasn't in Being Tom Hanks.
Yeah, he also was not in any movie that involved a color.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Blue's Clues, out of the question. No, but seriously, I already mentioned being John Malkovich. He was in The Line of Fire. There's that 93. Dangerous Liaisons.
In Red.
He was.
He was in Red. He was also, he's John Malkovich is one of those guys. First of all, you probably know him, but if you don't, he's one of those splendid actors that will pop up in the biggest blockbuster smash or the smallest independent film and just rock whatever he's in. It's really awesome. He was in Becoming Kubrick, which is an awesome film that we should definitely review sometime.
Yeah, very recently he did Velvet Buzzsaw. That's been getting some traction recently. But
I'm not familiar with that. What is that about?
Oh, he plays Piers in that. It's a thriller set in a contemporary art world. Basically, it's about a rampaging, a serial killer who is also an art collector.
Oh, cool.
That actually just came out this year. Anyway, back to
Faye Dunaway is in this movie. What has Faye done that we would know? A lot of older films, Bonnie and Clyde. Yeah, you would know Faye if you saw her.
Who was Faye in this movie?
She was John Malkovich plays the Dauphin of France, which is basically you're gonna be king if we can ever get the English the hell out of France.
We gotta get the rights.
Yeah. And she was his mother-in-law. Oh, okay, so here's something that I'm not particularly proud I know Faye Dunaway from. Dunstan Checks In. Y'all remember that film with Jason Alexander?
Yeah.
Yeah, dude. First of all, I love that movie for nostalgic reasons, but she plays the hotel owner's wife.
Oh, right.
Who's constantly hounding him about making the hotel better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like this movie is chock full of people that you'll know by face, but maybe not by name. You've seen them in other things.
Yeah.
One person you will know, though, is Dustin Hoffman.
Wait, it was Dustin this whole time? I thought it was Justin Hoffman.
It's
Academy Award winner Justin Hoffman.
Everybody makes that mistake.
Oh,
it's actually Gustan.
Gustan Hoffman?
Hoffman, yeah.
Hoffman?
Gustan Hoffman. And actually, so we'll get into this when we transition a bit, but he doesn't show up until much later in the film.
The movie, if
yeah.
I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, which
I forgot the timestamp.
It sounds weird, but if you watch the movie, it's appropriate.
Very applicable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I'm flipping through. He's so far down on the list. So according to IMDb, Dustin Hoffman's character plays as the Conscience. And I think I would agree with that. We'll go into it a little bit more later. But as I was watching it, I was, wondering, well, who is this? Who's he playing? Is he playing the devil? Is he playing God? The Conscience, as put on by IMDb. I'm okay with that moniker.
It's creative, but I definitely feel like as you watch the movie, you're going to have a very, strong opinion one way or the other about who he's actually playing. But we'll leave it there for now, and pick that back up when we tear into his character. So the IMDb description that we're working with is really straightforward. And actually not particularly revealing, in my opinion. A young girl receives a vision that drives her to rid France of its oppressors. The end.
.com.
No mention that she's Joan of Arc. No mention, of the time period. A little, I don't know. I feel like that leaves something to be desired. Anybody else?
Yeah. Okay, if you're watching this movie, The Messenger, A Story of Joan of Arc, there's a solid chance that you're familiar with Joan of Arc. So, are you saying that you appreciate the description because it doesn't fill in the blanks?
No, I'd say the opposite. I feel yes, it is in the title, and you should probably know it from the title. But a lot of people do actually refer to this movie just as The Messenger, because The Messenger, the story of Joan of Arc, is a bit of a mouthful. I feel I don't know. I'm surprised that a movie about Joan of Arc doesn't have her name even in the description on IMDb. That seems a little weird to me. I feel like the movies we've reviewed thus far in this podcast have been pretty spot on with their descriptions, and that just seems kind of curious
kind of vacant
to me. Yeah.
I agree.
Would you rather go off with the back of the jacket?
No, we'll roll with IMDb, and then I think we'll snag it when we transition into our personal overview. Speaking of which, we can go into that right now, and since we said personal overview, it is our duty to warn you. Spoilers are coming up because we don't hold back in our personal overview for spoilers. Where should we begin for this movie?
At the beginning.
That's always a good place to start.
Right place. No, I was really excited to talk about this movie. Man, I don't know if I loved it. I'm very, very thankful to have seen it. It's kicked off a lot of thoughts in my head. I struggle with a few things that we'll go into further. It is 100% worth seeing and forming your own opinion about. It's, I think that it would be easy to write this movie off as an action flick, but my takeaway from it was that it's more about questioning one's sanity and digging into her mind. I mean, honestly, I think the movie is half action, but then I don't know if it was exactly the halfway mark, but there's a sharp turn just after the midway point where it becomes a court movie. It's an investigation, and that really is the potatoes for the meat and potatoes of this movie. I'm excited to talk about it.
So let's, before we actually move into the deep personal overview, Mark, you reminded me, let's do the would you recommend. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Is it over the 50% line? Mark, I'm going to kick it to you because you sort of got the ball rolling on that.
I would definitely recommend watching this movie. 100%. Just for the thought-provoking nature of it. Sure, it's got its historical, weight, but at the same time, I really like... Well, man, I want to keep talking about it. But yes, if you're asking me thumbs up, thumbs down, I recommend it.
Yes, watch this movie. I remember seeing it on... back when AMC did play movies and not just Walking Dead reruns. I do remember watching it. I was like, whoa, I really need to get this. So I went to, again, a local video rental store when those were still a thing. And, picked it up, watched it from beginning to end. It's great. If you don't want to, 100% invest in and buy it off of a store shelf or online, you want to just take it slow, there should be a copy at your library or video streaming service where you can just put in the minimal purchase, and if you really like it, add it to your collection. I think it does belong on a lot of people's shelves.
Yeah, I that's a good note about the library, because I feel like that's the kind of place
that's the kind of thing you can
the library will absolutely have this movie. Every library will have this movie. And then you can also buy
more historical reference books if you want to delve deeper into the story or the facts.
Yeah.
See what they changed for cinema versus history.
So we got two thumbs up on this. I'm going to give it a third. I love this movie.
I was somewhat thinking, give him just ooh, I hope he does it. But this is your copy we watched.
It is my copy. Like I said in one of the earlier podcasts, I am going to be probably massively biased on this list, only because these are coming out of my collection. So I'm very likely to be enjoying the movies that we're watching. But this movie's no exception. It's a good movie. It's a really interesting take on the Joan of Arc story. I really dig it. It's something that I loved in my youth. And one thing that did surprise me a little bit watching it just now is there were some parts that I sort of took issue with, and I would love to pick apart, and we're going to later in this podcast, but it's still way over that 50% mark, and you should absolutely see it if you get the chance. So, back to the beginning.
Beginning. It's France. It's the 14th century.
Basically,
1400s.
It starts with a young Joan, and she's...
Well, I think it starts a little bit with the historical context. It sets it up. Yeah. This is we are, 95 years into the 100-Year War. Yeah. I don't know if you're familiar, as a listener, but this 100-Year War. I mean, it's funny because it was not 100 years long, but
it's like the War of 1812. Yeah,
it's just what it's referred to. But basically, England and France have been at odds with each other in some fashion for, an entire generation and a half, really. All they've known is conflict between the two of them for various political reasons that we're not going to go into here.
England going to war with someone?
Never happened.
Unheard of.
Yeah. But I think it does a good job of either refreshing the viewer on the context of the movie, or at least introducing them to,
setting the stage.
Yeah. Yeah, because
the stakes are laid. Yeah,
this is a biopic, so it's kind of necessary to understand some of the motivations of the characters and where they might be coming from. But continue. I'm sorry.
No, you're right. That's a good note that it does have sort of that classic period piece opening where, it does sort of like not scrolling text, but like text fading in and out, set over like a map that sort of describes, the 100-Year War and describes the conflicts between England and France and describes the state of the French monarchy, which is pretty instrumental to understanding this film and sort of what happens with Joan as she gets older. Yeah. And I'm probably, just full warning, I'm probably gonna like be fading back and forth between saying Joan and saying Jean, because it's Jean in the film, and that is definitely like how it was said. But I've definitely grown up my entire life with Joan of Arc, and somebody out there, probably many people, are cringing at hearing me say that. So just full warning, I'm going to be just like bleeding back and forth between those two.
I grew up with Joan of Arcadia.
No bragging.
No bragging. But I watched it with my aunt.
Yeah.
On a wholesome Thursday night.
So we start off with Joan as a little girl.
Joan's a little girl. She's growing up on this repressed side under the heel of the English. Just sucks to be in France right now in the 1420s, late almost 1430s. And she's just living day to day, having to pay tithes, having to serve these Englishmen, having to like see her friends and family members killed.
She's right on the border region.
Yeah, she's right there. She's seen the worst of the worst. And you grow up in that as a 10-year-old person, boy, girl, don't matter. You're gonna be traumatized for years into your adulthood.
Yeah, and sort of like I don't know if seminal is the right word, but one of the defining scenes of her as a child is her village gets raided, and her sister basically gets like killed and raped in front of her, more or less. And as you can imagine, that's a super horrific scene. And so actually, fair warning, if you're the kind of person that like
is it too late for trigger warnings? Because there's a lot of disturbing images in the first 20 minutes.
Well, and it's one of those things where it's like the scene definitely like yells out that it's coming, and now that we've told you, if that's the kind of thing you don't like, just skip 5 minutes when that scene presents itself, and it should be over.
I think it is the only real scene of assault in the movie. I mean, there are
as opposed to war.
Yeah, there's a lot of graphic imagery. But I think that it serves a purpose. When we first meet Joan, she is just this bubbly, overjoyed 10-year-old, despite her environment, and she has a very close relationship with her preacher. She's a very godly individual.
Goes to confession like 3 times a day, and the priest is like, "Get out of here, go play with other kids."
You're being weird, kid. Okay, but that assault scene, that is where her, this is the wrong word for it, but that's where she kind of wilts. That side of her crumbles, and it's a loss of innocence. Reality. Yeah,
it's a loss of innocence, and I think it also it signifies, it like codifies her faith to like an unquestionable level. Like I feel like they set it up very nicely that given uninterrupted communication and support, it's very possible that she would have taken the priest's advice and gone off and played with other kids and sort of developed these social relationships and maybe grown out of her need, her dependence on religion. And it was basically like that event where it was like, nope, my entire life is now dedicated to God, and this is what I'm doing. And I think as horrific as the scene is, it's absolutely necessary in developing her as a character into what she became. I'm not sure how accurate that is to sort of the real story of her youth, but at least for the purposes of the film, it really like gave direction to her character.
Which I think is super interesting, because one of the larger themes that I want to kind of talk about and suss out in this movie is the relationship with spirituality and religion in general. I think that a lot of people, and I don't want this to turn into a religious debate, but a lot of people turn to their faith for personal guidance to get them through traumatic experiences, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
And that's what Joan does. And I think a lot of people do that, and I think it just kind of speaks to that, that relationship that a lot of people have personally with their faith is, their faith gets them through those times. And, it either shatters your faith or it cements it. And it certainly does in her case.
So following this pretty horrific scene, her parents didn't actually die, but they needed to stay back to rebuild. And they basically send her along to live with her aunt and uncle, which she does, and it's sort of from there kind of cuts forward 10 years maybe. She's about 9 in the beginning of the movie, and she's 19-ish in the, I know she was 19 when she died, so 19-ish. Maybe a little bit younger when the movie jumps forward. And basically, the Dauphin of France, the guy who wants to become king, played by John Malkovich, he's kind of trying to figure out how he's going to get his crown. Meanwhile, there are these rumors, these murmurings of this young maiden who's basically made a name for herself, being very vocal about ousting the English and creating a front and claiming that she was sent by God to drive the English out. As you can imagine, this creates a lot of interest in the royal court, and she comes to the Dauphin, and they decide to put her to a test to make sure that she is actually worthy and actually sent by God. She passes the test, as you might imagine, and she basically, through a series of obstacles, convinces the French aristocracy and royalty, or would-be royalty, to let her lead France's armies to free the city of Orleans in France that was under siege by the English.
Which is just crazy.
Right.
And I think it really speaks to...
I said that really casually.
Yeah.
It is fucking crazy.
To recap, a peasant girl comes to the aristocracy and convinces them to give her their army. Okay? This is a factual account of what actually took place at this time, and it just underscores how downtrodden things were in France. France had nothing. They lost their capital. They lost what made them French. They were just a sliver of culture at that point. They had nothing. So it blows me away at how absurd and real that actually was. Continue.
And it was sort of interesting because all of the Dauphin's advisors were saying, this is a bad idea. You don't know this woman from, I was going to say Adam, but maybe Eve?
Yeah.
You don't know who she is. She could be an assassin. Or at worst, she could be an assassin. At best, she could just be an incompetent person who knows nothing about military strategy. And you're going to she's trying to convince you to give her an army. This is a bad idea, blah, blah, blah. His mother-in-law is actually the one that steps in and sort of realizes the fervor that she's generated with the people, and kind of recognizes that it's the people that you need on your side. You need to give the people faith, and you need to give them something to believe in. And this girl is doing that, where the French royalty and aristocracy are failing miserably. The people are losing hope. They are tired. They're defeated, basically. They're completely demoralized. And
What are the crazy things here? And again, I don't want to keep getting historical with it, but things are so bad at this point that the heir to the French throne is the English king. That's how bad things were. That they had nothing to lose.
Yeah.
They had
Darkest
nothing to
hour.
lose.
he even jokes that one of the tests basically involves somebody subbing in for him. And as he's evaluating the candidates, one of them looks very wealthy, because he is. And he jokes you certainly look the part of a king. You're well dressed and you're in all the trappings of money. You cannot possibly be me, because as everybody knows in France, I'm the poorest person in this country. Because he is so indebted and the royal coffers are so depleted. He actually jokes about how bad it is. So it really sort of illustrates the point of where France is in this. So after a beat, she gets the army, goes to Orleans. They sneak her into the city, which is still, the walled city is still held by France, and is sort of being starved out by the English. Mm-hmm. And she leads an assault against the English. Actually, there's a surprise assault that was conducted by her military council, and she had to basically turn it around. And in short order, she sort of successively won several battles and defeated the English, drove them off. And as anybody knows who knows anything about Joan of Arc, the sort of one of the most defining elements of her life was she was eventually captured by the English after the French monarchy sort of turned their back on her, and she was captured and then ultimately burned at the stake. It's probably important to note at this point that the part of the movie where she's actually in the English prison and undergoing like the trial and all this stuff, that is the part where Dustin Hoffman's character sort of pops up. And throughout this entire movie, she's seeing visions, and she had never seen this particular vision before. And he's basically like questioning everything she does and making her question her own sanity. I think is that sort of our elevator. That was probably the deepest of the overviews we've done, but
and I do
this movie I think merits it.
I do appreciate the thing about this movie for the deep dive is Joan's questioning of sanity with Dustin Hoffman's embodiment of the conscience. And there are those historical studies. So like, well, was Joan schizophrenic in her day and age, and just no one knew how to diagnose that back in 1429? Possibly. Because it's very unlikely that she was actually a messenger of a divine power in the landscape of Europe.
It depends on who you ask.
It depends on who you ask. Again, it depends on what story you want to take. Is it a peasant girl chosen by a higher calling, or is it an unfortunate post-traumatic stress person, or a person of mental health? Jessica was able to exist in that day and age without diagnosis.
I like that they...
I love that. I love that they're in that line.
They don't answer.
No, they don't. No. It's like, there's no consecutive like right or wrong. And even Dustin Hoffman's character goes into like, oh, you thought it was like this? Well, what if it was like this? What about this? The particular scene is like her finding her sword.
Yeah, and there was a sign from God that she was supposed to lead France's armies.
Oh, that's a sign from God?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
She found a sword in a field, and she took that as a sign that, God sent that sword to her to lead France's armies. And Dustin Hoffman, it's very like you watch it in the movie and you don't even question it. You're like, oh, well, obviously God sent that
in a heroic epic. Yes, that would be. She would be Jason against the Argonauts. She would be Hercules, but no, she's.
And then Dustin Hoffman is very casually like,
why?
Really? That's the most likely situation. There are of the literally infinite possibilities of how that sword got into that field. That's the one you choose.
You chose this one?
Yeah. It's like coming down through like rays of light.
Heaven. Yeah. That's the one you went with? Very good, young girl. It's like, oh, man. Oh, Dustin, you're making me feel things.
I feel like they had to do that to ground the movie.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Because
it's not a fantasy movie. It's not.
It's not. And she is a saint. So some people take that very seriously. And I think that I personally feel like they threaded the needle pretty well by, grounding it in kind of rational, thought and inquiry without answering it definitively and still leaving it open to people's personal beliefs.
I completely agree. I one of my favorite aspects of this film is that the entire time they really show the possibility that Joan of Arc could have been insane, or could have had some type of psychotic break. Like she's hearing voices and she's believing that God is speaking to her. And you not uncommonly with like schizophrenic, you hear things like talking to angels and talking
to relatives.
So she like one of the things I didn't really consider until you just brought it up, Mark, and I really appreciate you bringing it up, is like one of the things that I feel like the writers probably had to wrestle with immediately that I never really considered was here we have a person who's like on record, in the historical record, saying like they hear voices, they were sent by God, they were, doing all this stuff. She is a canonized saint by the standards of the Catholic Church. Like, but at the same time, reviewing that objectively, it sounds like somebody who is suffering from some type of mental illness. And they were faced with this issue of like, we're going to piss off a great deal of people if we choose one over the other. So they decided to do both and present them with no winner. And it was a very clever decision, because you can walk away from this movie feeling any way that you want. And it's really cool in that way. And kind of getting back to what I had said earlier about Dustin Hoffman's character, and I had sort of alluded to, like, you could take anything away from that character that you want. Like, my first instinct was like, that's the devil. Like, they present him like that. Like, he's in a black cloak with scleras. So his eyes are all blacked out. And he's talking, like, he's got a deep voice anyways.
And she's at her lowest. She's in a dungeon.
Yeah. Dude,
trial
she is.
And torture and imminent death.
Yeah.
So she's at her lowest.
And he is like, he's already got a deep voice, but they did something to his voice, and they like deepened it and like made it a little echoey, and it is just like haunting. It is just like, his voice is so fucking creepy, and I love it. Cause it's exactly what like Christian mythology would dictate the devil would do in that exact situation, is like show up after your faith has led you to this point and make you question your faith at the worst possible, like, it's the last temptation of Christ type shit. And, it was just like, it was a beautiful scene, but at the same time, you could absolutely interpret that as, you could interpret him as God. You could interpret him as her conscience, which it sounds like IMDb, took that lens, or perhaps they took that from, maybe he's listed as that in the credits or something. But like, it could just have been her conscience and her guilt having done what she did. Cause I mean, you basically have to wrestle with the issue of like, you're leading an army in the name of God.
Yeah.
Like, that whole like, don't kill thing, that's on a pretty important list from what I understand. Like, and turn the other cheek and all that bullshit. Like,
well, yeah.
And you're like literally slaughtering people.
But
how do you reconcile that?
Justify it with the Crusades too, yeah.
They do cover that though. There is a scene, where she is, she's full, action mode, and then all of a sudden she stops and she looks around. It's very like almost Saving Private Ryan-esque, and she's looking around at the slaughter. And you can see that she is thinking that same thing that you brought up, that, God, this was God's will. And she sees this, there's an Englishman who's knocked to the ground. He's still conscious. And there's a Frenchman who is pulling out the man, or is preparing to pull out the man's teeth. And she like runs up to him and she stops. And she's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And the Frenchman they're good teeth. He just says, I want them. They're good teeth. And then she, you can just see her like, well, it just doesn't fit her reality. And she's like, well, no, you can't do this. This is wrong. This is wrong. And she tries to say this to one of the captains of her army. And the captain, just kind of points around like, this is what you asked for.
Yeah.
This is what you wanted. And you can just tell that she is trying to grapple with that conflict, because if we suppose that God is real, is God going to take sides in a political battle?
The middle section of this movie can definitely be like summed up with the phrase like cognitive dissonance. Like, it's just, she is just doing some massively creative backflips to try and reconcile why it's okay for a Frenchman to smash out an Englishman's teeth in the name of God.
Because God's on our side, and you gotta remember, those Old Testament books and those old books from the Quran and stuff like that, they apply to the tribes of Israel. You don't have to be kind to your neighbor if your neighbor's a filthy, heathen. Or an Englishman.
Yeah.
You just gotta take care of number one, and number one is France.
Yeah.
If you're being medieval about it.
Number
Number un.
So, quick a point before we move on that I just like, I find absolutely haunting in this movie is, basically as they're going through, she keeps cutting back and forth, not all the time, but a lot, to these visions that she's having. And one of the things is she sees this like image of what is very clearly Jesus, first as a child, when she's a child, and he sort of grows with her. And first of all, the person they cast to play him is just like, the dude, sorry friend, he's got kind of a funky look about him. Like an unsettling look. Like he's got, I think he's got whatever Marty Feldman had, where his eyes are a little bulgy and they're sort of going different directions.
Yeah.
And I'm sure like he's not as haunting as that in real life. Like he's probably a normal dude in real life, but in this movie, like the way they portrayed him, like he's really unsettling to look at. And he just like keeps flowing back and forth between like being happy, like he dances with her, but then he's just sitting in this like stone throne staring daggers at her. And then at one point, when she's like basically in the middle of a battle, she cuts away to one of these visions, and he starts saying like, what have you done to me, Joan? What have you done? And then just like out of fucking nowhere, blood starts pouring from the top of the guy's head. And like before the vision ends, like his face is covered in blood, and it's basically Jesus screaming like more or less for mercy in her face. And then it like cuts back and she's back in the battle. So that scene is unsettling. Yeah. And in like the best way. I really appreciate the filmmakers for writing that in, because it's like, that's like the beginning of her own visions are causing her to question what she's doing.
Yeah.
And if her visions are really her conscience, then, you know, you can basically sell it as that.
Yeah, yeah. And it's important to note, too, you know, we're talking about her being in these battles and her winning these battles. She doesn't wield a sword. She wields a banner. Mm-hmm. So she uses the army as her weapon. I don't know if there's even any scenes where she kills anyone, other than I think there is, and I think it's touched upon later. But she is the motivator. She's pushing the army. She's she's rallying people. So when she sees the grisliness of what war is, she feels very responsible for it, because even though she's not hacking and slashing, you know, this isn't Braveheart in that regard. You know, she is, you know, everything that happens in that battle is her kind of, you know, she's the reason why they're there. She's the reason why they're not talking with each other. She is responsible for the bloodshed. The bloodshed.
And that is a point that's brought up later in her trial, where like that she was very good about sort of like pivoting away and turning it back to God and all this stuff when they were questioning her about all this shit. But the one thing that really got under her skin was when one of the judges, who's like they're all clergymen, one of them was asking her about her like using her sword, and like, God said it's okay to kill, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, I never killed anybody. I only use my banner. And then he's like, we have several eyewitnesses saying that you did use your sword. And she's like, well, I lost my banner, blah, blah, blah. And she like keeps trying to like pivot away from it. And he keeps pressing. And it's making her question whether she actually did, in the heat of battle, kill somebody when she was waving her sword around or not. And it's like, it's kind of breaking her down. And it again sort of contributes to this whole like, is she insane?
Yeah.
Kind of thing, which is kind of an interesting, you know, I mean, again, we say all this not to say that like she wasn't brave. Even somebody who's, you know, hearing voices has to have a hell of a strong resolve to fucking stare down an army and to come out of obscurity and lead an army. And like, this is not, you know, for the faint of heart. So nothing to, you know, knock her chops as far as, her ability to lead and to, you know, what she did for France. But she also could have been insane.
She's climbing up the ladder at the walls and gets hit point blank with an arrow. You know, she was getting her hands dirty. She just wasn't hacking and slashing. You know, yeah, no, I agree. Full bravery points.
So that was a very, very deep personal overview that we just did, and I think it was absolutely merited by this film. And if you're understanding why we had to go so deep, Go and see the movie, and
again,
I think
it's the longest runtime we've had to tackle. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Specifically, the acting. How are we? Like, I gotta say 2 points on the acting. First of all, Dustin Hoffman fucking killed it. God, he was so good, and he's so he's just, I keep using that word unsettling, but he's just...
Oh, he owns it. And there's a reason they kept him on just the back fourth of the movie. Because otherwise it wouldn't be a story about Joan of Arc. It would be about her conscience.
Yeah.
If he was there from day one, like, no. If he was there at the 9-year-old scene, no.
Like, he doesn't do much, but what he does is awesome.
He commands the scene. Yeah.
I'm actually gonna, like, I love Milla Jovovich. I think she's such a talented actress. But I'm gonna be honest, I didn't notice this so much when I watched this as a youth, but rewatching it, her performance does get under my skin a little bit. She's trying to convey this, like, very shaky, very unsure, but also sure kind of character, and it's just, oftentimes, it's just too much for me. She's too shaky, she's too, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Not mousy, but
frazzled, or like timid.
Timid. Yeah. She's way too timid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it's like, it's a very energized timid. You know, her eyes are bugging out. She's looking both ways.
She's very much cast for her eyes. Her and a lot of actors and actresses are cast because of their expressive eyes, and she could just pop them, and people can just, like, whoa, like, be commanded, like, because she will draw the camera to her. And so, yeah, it's a good thing and a bad thing in some situations.
Yeah, I don't think it's definitely not one of those things that, like, ruin the film. It's just a little bit, but, like, I definitely, like, I think her performance
in a very dark movie, in a very dark settings, a lot of times, you have to go to the whites and the greens of her eyes.
I think her performance in The Fifth Element, like, surpasses this by quite a bit, in my opinion.
Well, I think part of the reason, I guess,
she doesn't talk so much, Colin.
Oh, she actually doesn't talk very much in that movie. Maybe that was a poor comparison.
No, I think she succeeded very well in what she was trying to do, but she didn't show any range. But I have a hard time knocking her for that, because I don't think the movie really called for her to show a lot of range in this. I don't think
it asked for historical accuracy of Joan's personality, because, again, how can you gauge that? And it's like, that's a tough protagonist for any female to play.
Well, they were trying to walk that tightrope of, like, is she insane? Was she sent by God? Yeah. If she was in this situation, she would be unnerved. And, like, basically every situation is an unnerving situation for her. So, like, I get it. I just think maybe it was, like, a little over the top.
Certain takes might have been different or better.
I mean, I would argue it's probably... I mean, who knows? I have no idea. But I would assume it's probably historically accurate in that, like, how does a 16, 17, 18-year-old, girl command the respect of battle-hardened generals, captains? The only way you can do that is if you just extrovert the hell out of everything that you do. You have to be bigger than your body, because you're just a child.
Yeah.
And I think that you almost have to have that craziness in you, and I think that she did that really well. But again, she's not slowing down. She doesn't look calculated, but would she be? I mean, she's not known for being a mastermind so much as a force to rally the people around her. So
I'm also, like, okay, so I've actually got a lot of critiques of this film, and I think it's large. As much as I love this movie, I think it's largely because I loved it so much as a youth, and rewatching it has sort of, like, made me evaluate critically some of these things. But to be honest, like, I don't think it was Malkovich's best performance either. And I again, it doesn't, like, ruin the film. It felt a little shallow and a little, like, Malkovich-y, if you get what I'm saying. Like, it just didn't feel right for the character. And again, I am not particularly familiar with, like, whoever he was. I can't remember his exact title. Maybe there's a historical record that suggests that he was exactly like that, and I'm just unaware of it. That's possible.
Sure.
But I just felt like it was very Malkovich, and was not my...
Almost as if, like, his character read, you need to be, royalty who is shaky enough, who is unsure of himself enough to give away your army,
Right.
And so he just played that. And he played a character who was weak and meek, and, that it was believable enough that he would do that. And any rational person would not. and so he was not playing the rational person.
Yeah, I will say with in respects to Malkovich and Dunaway, I do appreciate their influence in this film and their take on the characters. Again, I have no frame of historical reference if this is exactly how the Duvall and mother-in-law would act, but it felt like a slice of stage play in the movie. Maybe it was ill-placed for some watchers, but I rather enjoyed the particular take on it. I thought it added some different elements rather than just the conflict between two armies and then the church and a girl. Like it was like this internal family conflict too.
I think Dunaway especially.
Yeah,
I think she
definitely brought it.
Now I think it's a character that she's used to playing, so she was well within her particular like wheelhouse. But like she's so good at playing that character that like she fucking nailed it. And it was like she was like sort of sly, sort of surreptitious. As far as directing, the movie is just really like, it's really unsettling, it's really dark, and it's really anxious. It's like, it's a really anxiety-provoking movie
love
because
how they play with lights with this. I love how Benson plays with lights with this. He will not shy away from a dark cellar or a dungeon. He will not shy away from a beautiful blue French sky as Joan's having her visions. He didn't play it safe. He just like with Fifth Element and his other very dramatic use of color and splash. I tip my hat to him. I think Tarsem wants to do what Besson does in a lot of his movies, but it just falls short. And for whatever reason, it works for Luke, but doesn't for Tarsem in my book. Another director we might have to watch on this podcast.
Where might the listeners know Tarsem from?
Oh, The Cell, The Fall, a Snow White remake.
Well, The Cell and The Fall are both on our list, so we will get there.
Yeah.
This excellent choice, and I think especially with the comparison between Fifth Element and those films, I definitely agree.
It fits, it fits our criteria.
So, my take on directing, and I don't know who to blame for this, and I guess I'm just going to pick the director. The pacing of this movie for me wasn't fantastic. I felt like there was a lot of good, like Tim, like you were saying, the cinematography of it was fantastic, but it really felt like two different movies. I think it almost could have served as like a part one and a part two. No, that would have been terrible because you wouldn't have wanted to watch the second one.
I would. I'd watch a 2-hour, Joan of Arc Part 1, and then the second is the trials and stuff like that. Yeah.
But for me, it was all action heavy at the beginning, and then she's captured, and boom, it is all trial investigation. It felt like all of the momentum kind of ground to a halt. And I know that was kind of important. And I know, just a little bit of backstory here, a lot of the information that we have about Joan of Arc came from the transcripts that were taken during her trial. So it was really important to hash through that and actually give that some weight. So I'm glad that they didn't breeze over it. But as far as the pacing with it, and I don't know how else you could have done it, but it felt to me like after the last sword clashed, if you weren't invested in the character, you're gonna pass out or you're gonna be done with it.
And I think like I agree with you, and I think there is a particular issue with the pacing right in the middle, the pivot between the first half and the second half gets into a little bit more. It basically, there's like one scene that has to explain why the French monarchy sort of turns their back on her. And it's like, that's really important. Like, it's really critical that you understand why they just decided, okay, we're not into Joan of Arc anymore. It's not our, that was last week. Like, and they do it in a scene, and it feels incredibly rushed, and you sort of come out of it going like, so why are they not into her anymore? Like, she just gave them back like half their fucking country, and they're just like, okay, never mind. And they sort of explain it where it's like, oh, he's got his crown and that's all he cares about and blah, blah, blah. But like, it just felt wildly insufficient. Both the Dauphin, or the king at this point, both the king and his mother-in-law, who were huge supporters of her in the beginning, just completely turn face. And there's very little explanation as to why.
Yeah.
Which is, it's very unsatisfying, and it's also very confusing, and it sort of drives that wedge and in my opinion, makes the film feel like it's in two parts. One thing I did think was directed really well were there were these really sort of protracted battle sequences, and like battles in a lot of movies tend to be shown as, they're either really short or they don't show a lot of like detail. They cut back and forth between all of these various things, and they rely on these quick cuts to sort of confuse your eye. And this movie doesn't do that so much. Like, there are some really long shots of battle, and you're almost, by the end of the battle, I mean, I love battle sequences. I do. I have since I was a kid. But at the end of the battle sequence, you're almost tired of seeing battle. You're like, okay, I'm done. I'm ready for this to be over. And like, that's good. I feel satisfied.
Again, it does it so well with feeling the weight of that armor that all the soldiers and Joan are wearing. You feel like the mud on their boots and on their face and horses. You feel the sweat off of everybody. It doesn't shy away. It doesn't make people look pretty in victory or defeat.
Right.
It doesn't make that distinction. And hats off to that. And it doesn't shy away from intense angles. Like they won't just play it safe with dolly shots or crane shots. They will get up in there.
Which I think is one of the reasons why people will draw a pretty close comparison to Braveheart. Just the battles were just really visceral.
Yeah, they weren't pretty. They were in mud and blood, and everybody else is steel and entrails. Yeah.
There were a couple of scenes that were like, the actual like filming, like the actual was not my favorite. Like, there was a scene in which he was on trial, where there was sort of this slow zoom going on, but it was really choppy. And like, I'm not the kind of person who like, pisses and moans about cinematography, but it's something that I actually noticed. And if I noticed it, that's not great.
Yeah.
As far as the writing goes, I think this movie was written well overall. One thing that I felt was a little weird, and like, it's weirder now that I'm older because I feel like I'm noticing it more, but like, there's definitely like a sexualization of her with Jesus. Yeah. Which is like both interesting and intriguing, but also feels a little weird and dirty and kind of like, it's a really unusual take that they decided on, and like, it's not like explicit. It's just sort of suggestive or hinted at, or like...
What makes you uncomfortable, Colin? She's a bride of Christ.
Yeah. Can you dig into that a little bit? Because those notes didn't jump out to me.
Yeah, so like, so some of the dialogue, or some of the, like, the way she describes her, like, relationship to God, sort of like hinted at it, and then there were some, like, the scene with him dancing with her in the woods was a little suggestive of that, like... They're in the woods, and it's, like, really intense, and he's, like, staring at her, and then the next scene, they're, like, swinging around each other, and you can't really see what's happening, and there's, like, laughing and stuff. I don't know, it just, there's that scene, which is kind of even weirder, when she's, like, a kid, and she, like, breaks into the church, and, like, starts guzzling wine, because she wants to be one with God, and, like, I don't know, it just... Yeah. It was all really subtle, and like, I never noticed it before, but rewatching it sort of jumped out at me, and it didn't ruin the film. It's just sort of an interesting take.
Mm-hmm. That's fair.
Yeah, there's definitely can be that underlining, possible subtext.
Yeah, and it was one of those things where it's like, if I saw that on paper before we were going to like film the movie, I'd be like, let's maybe like not do that. Like, right. let's change that stuff up a little bit.
Right.
Yeah. One thing about the writing that I appreciated is it really it showed how interwoven religion was with the political aspects of the time. The most intelligent, kind, wise characters in this movie were the religious men, and the most just batshit crazy, absurd, irrational, cruel were the religious people. So, and then like the secular, I guess viewpoint, or the your everyday schmuck person just kind of fell somewhere in the middle, and they were just kind of being jostled between two megalith points of view, and I think it really did a good job of illustrating what it was probably like at the time, where you just had to do what you were told, and you had to walk a tightrope, because you could be confessing and confiding one minute and being burned at the stake the next. That's how they lived their lives. You were either a part of us and you were warm and you were secure and you were safe, or you were against us and you were nothing. You were trash. You were worse than nothing. You were a plague to be exterminated.
Well, and sometimes you can still be on that in crowd and still get fucked over. All of her captains and everything, they came up with the ransom for her, and they could have gotten her out, and the King of France didn't do it because basically the problem was quote unquote going to take care of itself because he didn't want her around anymore, which was pretty fucked up.
And when she's captured and ransomed off to the English, because it's not technically the English who capture her, but the English, they follow the same god as the god of France, and so there's this kind of the king is looking for the religious men of Rome to justify his decision to burn her at the stake. He goes into it. He wants her burned, and here, put her on trial. Wash my hands of this. Make this something that is right by God.
Yeah, they need to burn her for heresy, because if they burn her for secular reasons, like you're on the other side, they're going to make her not only a martyr, but they're going to completely demoralize their own army, because basically their army is going to think that they burned a servant of God.
Yep.
And that can't happen. So he needs the church to basically sanction the burning, which is also
excommunication of Joan. Yeah.
Here's something interesting. The king in this movie, the English king who wants her burned, that actor is actually the guy who plays the executioner in Braveheart.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
When I saw him, I was like, oh shit, it's that guy. All right, so one more thing that I swear to God, this is my last complaint about this movie. I feel like I've thrown out a lot of things I don't like. I actually do really like this movie overall, and I'm just nitpicking because it's sort of hot in my mind. So the practical effects don't particularly hold up. I don't think that's a critique that's uncommon of any moderate budget film that had enough money to do the CGI, but not so much that it was so good that it held up 20 years later. I think it's common critique, but it's something that if you're sensitive to not so great special effects, that might get to you. But the practical effects are outstanding.
Oh gosh, yeah.
The actual fight sequences, they fucking fought, and it was cool and it was practical.
I agree, but it does not look like this movie came out the same year that The Matrix did, but it did. So I would agree. I think that the practical, they don't really hold up in the same way that maybe some of the other movies at the time did. But I can overlook it because I don't think that was what they were trying to underscore in this movie. But I agree with that criticism.
It wasn't a critical part of it didn't make or break the film. It was just little bits and pieces. So favorite quote. How are we feeling, fellas?
Hang on. Before we jump right into that, really quickly, I wanted to mention the soundtrack and the score.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Yeah, go for it.
Holy cow, that makes this movie for me. It's so ominous. It's so dark and melodic. And, from the first 15 minutes, you know what you're in for. I really enjoyed the score to this movie. I think it was done very well.
It aids the tone immensely. Every scene, you know exactly what you're supposed to be feeling.
Anxiety.
Characters, yeah, exactly.
Every scene, anxiety.
Be anxious. be it an audience with the king, or battle with the English, or your trial and imminent death.
Yeah,
Jesus.
The tone is set.
But I agree, Mark. It was solid.
Yeah.
All right, but we're going into quotes. You brought it up. What do you got for us, Colin?
So I've got 2.5 quotes. And I say 2.5 because one is standalone and one is actually tied together. So my first one is we had said that the mother-in-law of the Dauphin is kind of important, and she's sort of she's not a huge character, but she's sort of whispering in his ear, and she's making sure that he gets crowned king, because that makes her powerful. And there's a scene like the day of the coronation when he's to become king, she goes in and there are these clergy members who are freaking out because there's this holy oil that was allegedly given by God to somebody to anoint some king in the past, and it's all gone.
Probably to David, I'm guessing.
Some special fancy God oil that anoints kings, and it's all gone, and they're freaking out, and they're like, "This oil is a miracle. It's a miracle. This can't happen." And then she like takes the vial from one of them and pulls this other vial out from her bosom, and like begins to pour it into the empty one, and one of the clergy members says, "What are you doing?" And she says, "Performing a miracle." And I just thought that like was so, but she says it so like performing a miracle, like right. So. Yeah. Oh, I love it. It was, she could deliver it. It was so well delivered, and it was just like basically like, shut your face. He's going to become king, and it's going to be awesome.
You're not going to stop this. I'm going to make this happen.
Right.
Shut up and take the oil.
So definitely that one. And then my other favorite is two quotes about the same thing, and these have always been my favorite quotes from this film. So after the first battle, the French seize a trebuchet from the English army that was laying siege to Orleans. And for those of you who don't know, a trebuchet, it's not a catapult, but a lot of people see a trebuchet and they think catapult. It's basically a large siege weapon that operates like a big sling, and it slings these very heavy balls, great distances, and it's good for breaking down like castle walls and shit. So
it's more armored than a catapult would be.
And so the French end up capturing it, and one of her captains, kind of funny guy, he stands up and in this like really thick French accent is like, "That's mine." He just like claims it like he sounds like a toddler. He sounds like a toddler that found a toy. And like probably 5 minutes later, they're like carrying it to the next battle, and he just like somebody like trips or moves or something, and he just goes, "Hey, be careful with my baby." It's just classic.
And it really jumps out, too, because it's like a moment of levity, amongst the bloodshed, so it sure highlights. I think for me, I had to, I think I'm just going to land on one for now. And it's a quick quote at the beginning of the movie before the village burning scene. She's filled with joy. She's just hit the confessional, and she's running through the flowers, and she doesn't have a care in the world, and she opens up the door to her home, and she yells to her parents, "Isn't it wonderful?" And she's just it's so, there's so much joy in her delivery of that moment, her character's delivery. It's not played by Milla at that point. So you set that scene aside, and then you jump forward in the movie, and after she's been granted the army by the Dauphin, they arrive at Orleans, and there's another character who is basically just telling another one of the characters, another one of the people in the town that Joan has arrived, and she claims, "Isn't it wonderful?" And it's 3 words. I think a lot of people will skip by it without even thinking about it. But for me, it jumps out because at the beginning, "Isn't it wonderful?" is she's talking about God. She's talking about being filled with the Spirit. What have you. Mm-hmm. And at that midway point, it's about Joan arriving, and how I just really enjoy the contrast. She is filled with God at the beginning, and someone else is filled with joy because Joan has arrived, and it almost like it's replacing God for them with Joan. I just really enjoyed the contrast between the two scenes, and I have to imagine that bit of dialogue was intentional. If it wasn't, it's a fantastic mistake, or just happenstance.
Well, it sounds like a solid comeback.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you got, Tim?
All right. So if I remember the context correctly, this is during Joan's interrogation during the later part of the film, and the end of this is the tagline of the film, of course. But the lead up to that is way more powerful. So it justifies it being a trailer clip because the payoff is fantastic. And they're like, "What do you think you are?" It's all like they're questioning her endless hours, and she just finally goes like, "I don't think. I leave that to God. I'm nothing in all this. I'm just the messenger." And that's that's the bit of the fantasy that I really enjoy about her story, is like she does want to offer herself up as a right hand of justice for France, right hand of belief and vengeance and justice for her people, where she can, deliver God's message to free France of her enemies.
Yeah, and I think it underscores...
And the messenger line comes back again, peppered out throughout the movie as well, too.
Yeah. I think it underscores that she's not interested in explaining herself, She is.
Yeah, and she is neither above or below her station. She knows exactly what she is destined to do, by divine intervention to do.
Yeah.
And I just love that she's still so grounded in that. Her faith is unshaken of that. As a faithless heathen myself, I can still admire that.
I think she also illustrates that with her contrast with the Dauphin in the beginning. She's basically kissing his feet. You get the impression that she loves nobody more than this man. He is the savior of France and blah, 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 blah. And then halfway through the film, when they lose faith in her and stuff like that, and he doesn't give her the resources that she needs, she basically barges in on him and throws something at him. And it really illustrates that her faith in the Dauphin was exclusively rooted in her faith in God and what she thought God was telling her to do, which is kind of cool, that they were that careful with the character and how the character played out these things.
This is the making of a good protagonist, person's foundation who's not swayed by worldly means necessarily.
No, I completely agree. How we feeling on rating, fellas? Are we do we think we've captured this one and we're ready to move on to ratings, or
we could keep talking about it for a while?
Honestly, yeah.
There's a lot to
unpack.
Yeah,
right. I mean, this is something again. I wanted to brush off this movie from the past because again, I love me 99 movies. So yeah, no, I definitely could get into. We could go to the library, like we were saying, and get this movie, and get a BBC documentary, and get tons of books from both the young adult, and children's section, all about Joan's story, because it's for all ages. This movie isn't for all ages, obviously.
It is not.
It's you gotta wait for PG-13, I think. Oh no, it's an R-rated movie.
But solid R.
So it's a solid R, but I don't think it's nearly as bad as some R's.
No, I think the R is appropriate, but I feel like your thought that it might be PG-13. Sometimes with the biopics, they dial them back a little bit on the rating because of the nature of the content, and it's not sort of gore for gore's sake or that kind of shit. So
going for that historical realism to a certain degree.
Yeah, but I think we're ready to start wrapping it up, but. We've already talked about it. This is definitely a movie to watch with some people and spur conversation. 100%. It's very thought-provoking. At least it was for me. So speaking of ratings, we'll start with you, Tim. What are you throwing at this?
At The Messenger, Story of Joan of Arc. I really want to again try to think of a broader audience, and in my mind, I think again, old and young audiences can enjoy this.
Not too young.
Obviously, 13 and up, I think.
Yeah. Definitely.
At least. Again, parents, use your judgment. I think from a movie from 99, with some historical context, with some fictional peppering in there, with some action, drama, and interesting questions about philosophy in there. I'd like to think I could recommend this to a wide range of audiences, be it believers, non-believers, history buffs, people just curious about France or England during that 100 Years' War. I'm going to give this an 8.3 white banners on horseback.
Nice. Wow, that is a strong rating.
I think that's my highest rating and longest runtime. So get ready, folks. Strap in.
Yeah. This movie, I used to absolutely love this movie. I think I said this already, that it was one of my favorites, and I still really like this movie. Rewatching it as an adult, I haven't seen it in a number of years. There were, I felt some things that didn't hold up, and I'm looking at it through a slightly more critical lens now. I think my rating would have originally been a little bit closer to yours, Tim. But I think I think I'll give this a 6.6 swords from God.
Swords from God. Now, I know we've talked about conversions before, but do you feel like that's a pretty close conversion to Swords of God to?
I mean, it's no
banners?
it's no holy oil from bosoms, but
That's true.
Yeah.
You know, it's amazing that you bring that up because that was exactly what I was going to move to, that
Damn
kind
it.
of measurement.
I stole your thunder. I'm sorry.
No, you didn't. I think it was a great segue.
Yeah.
So for me,
You can just call it what it is. It's boob oil.
boob oil. Yeah, there you go.
I like the good under boob oil.
Oh man,
just really
the
gets me.
visuals.
What? You guys don't enjoy that?
That'll be for next time.
Okay.
So
When you're
3
there,
men in a basement after dark.
when you're there in the countryside of France, you just find this peasant lady, and you just got some sweet under boob oil there. She takes you back for
Okay,
some bread. And
I
wine
actually
and
have a movie that's like relevant to this, and we're gonna watch it soon. So
I can't wait.
Sorry.
Oh God. Okay, so
Okay.
enough banter. Let's get to the meat. Okay,
Let's get to the brie and wine of this.
what I appreciated most about this movie was after the movie was done, and I was reflecting on it, and it wasn't even so much. I don't know. I mean, how do you judge a movie? In the past, I've judged it just how much I enjoyed it. I think I'm going to give this a 7.2. I don't know. We'll be crude about it. Boob oil. That's not where I was going, but sure, we'll call it that. 7.2 boob oils.
Hey, at least you didn't go with like 7.2 burning torches at a stick.
I was a little worried somebody was gonna go with
I was tempted.
with the stakes.
I was very tempted.
I think-
Also, to call a bundle of sticks something that's not PC this day
there
and
we go.
age.
Yeah.
We're there.
We're there.
We've made it there.
As a movie, it's not. Again, I got issues with the pacing. I've got a few other issues, but I really liked the conversation that was pulled out from it. I really liked, the dissection of it. But that's me projecting onto it. So yeah, I'm gonna stick with that 7.2.
Right on. So anything
Definitely
else?
all over the 50% mark. Yeah, like we were saying.
Oh yeah, no, definitely over the 50%. If you get a chance to see this movie, I agree with Tim. You can probably find it for free at a library. At least watch it. Actually, it's probably something that's probably on a streaming service for free
like
as well.
Vudu or Netflix.
Yeah,
I don't know,
yeah.
Amazon.
Anything
It
else?
won't be a hard find.
Anything else before we wrap things up?
No, this was a good one though.
All right. Well, thanks, listeners. That's all for the Ulcrep review. Thank you for listening again. And if you have any ideas for movie reviews, email us at 3. That's the number 3. meninabasement@gmail.com. Until then, I am Colin McLeod.
Mark Colpier.
Timothy Magic signing out.
All right. See you in cyberspace.
Vive la France! La femme! La femme power.